Again, I cannot believe the kind of shit that you have to take for just doing obvious journalism, for just asking obvious questions, doing logical questions and inquiries. All of a sudden, and for going on the number one news show to tell your truth. It's amazing that the establishment journalists, it's got to be jealousy and projection, right? So you're a true outsider to journalism, right? You didn't come up through the New York Times and stuff. I mean, I think you wrote for Salon and The Guardian, but you're an outsider. You live in Brazil, and
but I started by creating a blog. I just started a blog one day, and it got a big readership, and that's how I was able to go to Salon. So you're right. I started as a complete outsider. And I think the point you're making is such an important one. It's almost like, it's so bizarre with American journalists. It's almost like the more stories you break that are consequential and difficult and real journalism, the more they hate you.
Yes.
Who has broken more stories in the last, say, 12 years than Julian Assange? Nobody. Nobody has broken more stories in the last 12 years than Julian Assange. Every journalist on the planet should be throwing roses at his feet. But instead, they hate him so much, they're perfectly content to watch the Biden administration, first the Trump administration and then the Biden administration, prosecute him for publishing, for doing their fucking jobs that they're too afraid to do. They didn't say shit about what Trump tried to do to Julian Assange. It was really Mike Pompeo and Jeff Sessions. Trump barely knew what was going on. But still, he was responsible. It was his administration. It was the one time they agreed with Trump. Like, yeah, stick Julian Assange in a dungeon. And with me, they've always kind of had to treat me a little bit differently because of what you said. Like, I was at The Guardian when I did the Snowden story, and that's a respectable newspaper. And then I founded The Intercept with a billionaire's money, and a lot of journalists they like went to work there. So I've always had one foot in their world in a way that Julian didn't. But now that I don't, now that I've left The Intercept and I'm at Substack, they're just at war with me. And I'm at war with them, too. And I probably started that war. But I do definitely believe that one of the reasons they harbor so much contempt for me is because they know that I've done actual journalism that they could never do. So it's almost like the more success you have as a journalist, the more these so-called journalists hate you. It's very bizarre.
It is bizarre to watch. Like, I'll see blue check people just make the most ridiculous broadside ad hominem attacks against you. They never engage you on the substance of what you're talking about. They never argue back in good faith. It's always just a broadside bullshit smear. And then they move on. I'm like, that guy is 10 times your better, and you're going to do an underhanded smear and move on? I mean, Glenn, as you know, maybe you don't, I have almost zero respect for journalists in America. There's like maybe a handful of them.
I've noticed that.
There's like a handful of them that are worth anything, and most of them work at the gray zone, and the other ones teach in prison. I mean, they're not fucking. The reason why the United States country is in the sad state that it is in great part because the people who are screwing up our country bought those journalists, and none of them will ever cross the establishment. And when I do it, they come at me, a pothead in his goddamn garage. I can outdo them and do on a daily basis. Whenever I turn on that camera, I'm doing a better job than most of the people in journalism in America. Because if they'll never tell the big stories, they'll never cross the establishment, they'll never tell you the truth about fucking war, that's for sure. And they won't even tell you the truth about Glenn Greenwald or censorship. It's a scary time that we live in when journalists won't stand up for Julian Assange or journalism. Isn't that, I mean, the fact that they won't stand up for their own profession. What kind of I always thought the kind of people who were drawn to journalism were, the kind of people who weren't looking to make friends or career climb. But that's been totally replaced. It's like you could go to work at Wall Street, or you could go work at the New York Times or the Washington Post. It's just like, what? It's just like you're totally establishment. Do you think that it has changed the type of person that is attracted to journalism now? If it's a much less, I don't know. they just don't seem to have any integrity or the kind of grit you need to be a journalist. They're just climbers and they're herd mentality.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't want to romanticize the past, and there were a lot of horrible things the New York Times and Time Magazine and the Washington Post did in the Cold War. They were very closely tied to the CIA, disseminating propaganda. But the kind of icon of a journalist, like reporters, newspapermen as they called them in the 40s and 50s, they were like blue collar workers. They were all unionized. That's why there were guilds. None of them made any money. They didn't go to elite schools. They fucking hated the elite.
Yes.
That's why they went into journalism, because they wanted to go to war with the elite.
Yes.
They wanted to expose all their hidden filth and pathology, right? So the classic journalist is the guy with ink stained fingers and going to union meetings, and they didn't live in the same neighborhoods as Wall Street tycoons and CIA luminaries. They hated those people. They were complete outsiders. I think the thing that most changed was the corporatization of journalism, which took place in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and continues to this day, where enormous corporations like Westinghouse and then Disney bought up these media outlets. And so they just became another unit of these corporate outlets, like Comcast owns NBC and MSNBC. So, Comcast sells cable packages, and they sell devices, and then they sell cable news. So anyone who thrives in their media unit is just a corporate whore. And the attribute to succeed in a corporation, a big corporation, is subservience. It's being authoritarian. It's being subservient to power, which is the exact opposite of what the attribute of a journalist has always been and is supposed to be. And if you look, it's so, one of the reasons why I have so much contempt for these journalists is in part because I do think that they're doing so much damage, because journalism actually matters. It shapes how the society functions. It influences and molds how people think. But also they're such fucking cowards. This is what I hate about them more than anything, is they're so petrified of stepping out of line, even just a little bit, from the orthodoxies of their herd.
Yes.
And this is the biggest change from the Trump years, is that what they really do more than anything, most of what they do now is they target not the CIA or the NSA or the Justice Department and FBI or Wall Street and Silicon Valley. Watch how often they talk about them. It's almost never. And if they do, it's with reverence. They just repeat what they're told to say by those units. They never go and challenge those factions. They mostly ignore them or worship them. The people that they love to target are private citizens who have the wrong ideology.
Yes.
To get them kicked off the internet, to prevent them from raising funds for their legal defense, to dox them. These are they're fucking bullies. They're using their big journalistic platforms to target powerless people. And the worst thing about it is, once they do that, as they do it, they turn around and make themselves the victim.
The victims, yes.
So if you're writing for a major paper like USA Today, or you are a front page writer for the New York Times like Taylor fucking Lorenz, or, you go on cable news and you were a former FBI agent, now you work for the CNN, and someone with a big account on Twitter comes and criticizes you for the bullshit you're spewing, they immediately oh my God, I'm being harassed. I have to lock my account. I'm being so traumatized. Go fucking look at what happens when you do real journalism if you want to see what harassment and abuse and trauma are. And the reason I have no sympathy for them is because most of the time they're the bullies. They're abusing their platform to attack not power centers, but the powerless people whose politics and ideology they hate.
Yeah, that's such an important point that you make about American journalism, and what's not happening is that they're not using their powerful platforms to challenge the power centers in America. They're doing exactly what they're doing: cancel culture. They're doing tattletaling, but often turns into just flat out bullying. And just that Taylor Lorenz, her claim to fame was she got CEOs fired and stuff like that. And so now you're upset that people tweet things that, I mean, your job is to take down motherfuckers, and you're going to be upset when people push back against you, and you're printed on anyway, it's just, I can't get over how bad. And it's such a silver lining for me is that I get to have a show that's popular and successful, and I get to sell out theaters now because people at the New York Times, Washington Post, now The Intercept, they all suck so horribly that I can do a better job than them. And I do. It doesn't take much.
Well, and let me just say, because I see your show a lot. I'm not trying to return compliments. I just want to make this point, with your show. I watch your show. I don't watch it all the time. I watch it a lot, and I think that I used to get this all the time. Ironically, people, these journalists who call up the CIA and then publish what they're told to say by saying a CIA, operative told me anonymously, and they think that's real reporting. And they would say, I don't do real reporting, I do media criticism.
Yeah.
As though that's something different. To me, if you dissect what media propaganda is, and you show why it's propagandistic and deceitful and baseless and manipulative and wrong, that is reporting. That's real reporting. You're showing the public why and how the dominant messaging that they're receiving, that's being transmitted to them by the most powerful institutions, is misleading them, because you're showing them what the actual truth is, or at least what there's no evidence to believe. And that's what you do. I watch your segments. There's a lot of preparation that goes into them. You kind of, you dissect individual paragraphs. You show where the propaganda is. And for me, your show really does do more journalism than 90% of the people who work in these digital media outlets who call themselves journalists. I learn more watching a segment of your show about some news item than I do reading the bullshit that they spew out. Half the time they're not even talking about news anyway, but even when they are, it's just regurgitation of what all their friends in media are saying without a molecule of critical thought being devoted to it.
Oh, I appreciate the compliment, but I try to point out to people that, look how bad MSNBC and CNN are. They won't even have Pulitzer Prize winner Glenn Greenwald on to push back against the dominant narrative of Russiagate. They didn't stop having him on in 2016. December, I think, was the last time they had. Wasn't it something like that? And I try to point out to people, I go, now, if they were interested in getting the truth, wouldn't they bring on Glenn Greenwald? Wouldn't they bring on Aaron Mate? And if I'm so wrong, why wouldn't they want to expose me as a kook that I am? They'll never touch it. They'll never bring you on. They'll never ask you on, which is why we have to go on other shows. And I just, it's scary to me how well propaganda works. Is it scary to you? I see it now. Once you see it, you can't unsee it.
No, exactly. I'll tell you something really interesting. First of all, I used to be friends with a lot of MSNBC hosts. I don't have any friends who are MSNBC hosts anymore, but I used to have a lot because I used to go on those shows all the time, and that was my milieu. And so I know a lot about how they work. And one of the things that one of them told me once is that they don't get show-by-show ratings. They get segment-by-segment ratings. And they told me that if they put on somebody who attacks Democrats, you can see the audience plummet. You can see them turning off the TV. And so it's almost like an electric shock therapy where they're trained never to put on any dissidents, anyone criticizing the Democratic Party narrative, because they can lose their jobs. And then in 2011 or 2012, Chris Hayes, who you mentioned earlier, so compliment in such a complimentary way, he wrote a book called Twilight of the Elites. I think I talked to you about this before.
Yes.
It was a good book. It was before he got his MSNBC show, before he got ruined. And one of the main themes of his book was cognitive capture. And what he said was, if you go to work for an elite institution, if you immerse yourself in any kind of an elite culture, no matter how well-intentioned you are when you go there, no matter how resistant you think you are to whatever their pieties are, even if you think you're going there to subvert it or to undermine it from the inside, eventually it will co-opt you, because you'll spend so much of your time ingesting all of their orthodoxies, making friends with all the people who see the world the same way, that eventually it'll like convert you. And you won't even realize anymore that you've been hoarded out, because now you have a second home in the Hamptons and a huge mortgage and a $4 million a year contract that you'll never get again if you lose your job at MSNBC. So you end up desperately doing whatever you need to cling to those riches, which means becoming a propagandist for the Democratic Party, even if you started off as a critic of the Democratic Party. One of the people most victimized by this dynamic wrote a book doing among the best jobs, describing what it was before he fell into it. And I interviewed him for Salon when his book came out, and I asked him that question because at the time he had that shitty weekend show.
Yes.
That was actually a good show, but no one watched it. And he was about to get his nighttime show. And I asked him, I said, Chris, you now work for one of these elite institutions. So if your argument is, which it was, if you go and immerse yourself in them, inevitably, there's no avoiding it, you will get co-opted by it. What steps are you taking to avoid that happening to you? And you know what he told me?
What?
He said, I don't know. I haven't really thought about it. And I guess we see the results. He was telling the truth. He hadn't thought about it.
I'm sure that was controlled not thinking about it. That wasn't accidental not thinking about it. That was like, I'm not going to think about it. Fuck it. Why think about it? If I think about it, I won't do it. So I'm not going to think about it. I've been in those situations. You don't want to think about it. All right. You got to go? You done with us? You busy?
Getting done. Getting a little sick of you.
Yeah, I can tell. I
have like a 40-minute tolerance for Jimmy.
I know.
Dore, I haven't talked to Steph at all. Or if I did, I probably would have been able to stay longer.
Exactly.
It's been all Jimmy, so...
Hey, my next story is on AOC. She's giving money to people who diametrically are opposed to progressive values. You've heard that story, right?
My favorite tweets these days are the ones who have to say, look, I fucking hate Jimmy Dore. We all hate Jimmy Dore. He's a complete prick and a complete asshole. But it's time to admit that he was right about AOC.
I've seen a few of those. I love those.
Yes.
Those are fantastic. Or I owe Jimmy Dore an apology.
There's going to be we could put a whole book of those soon. She's really having a major That's what happens, by the way. It's so easy to be in opposition and to just be like, Trump is a fascist. Trump's terror. Once your party that you have to defend, she doesn't have to, but she's choosing to, is in power, that's when the real character shows. Because it's so easy to pretend that you're good when you have no power. Once you get the power, it's the same thing that happened to Obama. Your real face shows, and then the people who have to defend you, their real face shows too. And now she's fucking defending concentration camps at the border, not explicitly, but effectively, by not calling them concentration camps, by making excuses for Biden, by saying it's not as bad as Trump. Everyone sees what she is now. And I think you played a big role in that.
I hope. Well, you and I both got conned by her at the beginning. I don't know if you did, but I know I certainly did. I got conned by her, and I wanted it to work out. Nobody was more chagrined than me. Anyway.
Yeah, you want to believe. If you watch politics as much as we do, you talk about it as much as we do. You don't want to be angry. You want to have hope. You want to be able to tell people, oh, look, here's something to be encouraged by. And I urged people to donate to her campaign when she was running against Jim Crowley. I like Joe Crowley. I was like one of her first, advocates, along with Justice Democrats and the Young Turks and Ryan Grimm and you. And so it was not like I take pleasure in it. It's just that what it proves is the Democratic Party is so fundamentally corrupt that if you attach yourself to it, it's going to drag you into the sewer no matter how much you try and resist. And I don't think she's resisting particularly hard anyway.
Hey, everybody, this is the part where I tell you where all our live shows are, but there aren't any. And then this is why I tell you to join our premium program and get extra content, but nobody's got a fucking job. So just enjoy the video.